east of Chang'an, before the gates of the Weiyang military encampment. Grand Commandant Zhou Bo and Liu Zhang, the Marquis of Zhushu, and brother of the King of Qi, arrived with dozens of the Grand Commandant's personal guards. The gates of the Weiyang camp were shut tight. Up on the watchtowers, guards drew their bows and nocked their arrows, shouting, "The Northern Army Command, halt! Trespassers will be executed." A guard of the Grand Commandant rode forward, holding high the Grand Commandant's tally. "The Grand Commandant is here in person. Open the gates immediately." Yet the guards paid no heed to his status as the nominal supreme military commander of the Empire, merely repeating, "The Northern Army Command, halt! Trespassers will be executed." The Commandant's guard spurred his horse a few steps forward, but before he could utter a word, the whistling of crossbow bolts tore through the air. Over a dozen bolts struck the ground just paces ahead of him. Terrified, the guard wheeled his horse around. The Northern Army shouted again, "The Northern Army guards the capital region. We answer only to Imperial edicts and the Supreme General. Trespassers will be executed." Zhou Bo personally spurred his horse forward, completely ignoring the warning shots. With the imposing presence of an undefeated general, he narrowed his eyes at the watchtower and roared, "Who dares to execute me?" Silence fell over the watchtowers. All the soldiers involuntarily lowered their crossbows, but the heavy gates remained tightly shut. Pacing his horse back and forth before the gates, Zhou Bo shouted, "The Grand Commandant is here. Have the Capital Commandant come see me." Shortly after, the Capital Commandant hurried up the nearest watchtower and immediately bowed to Zhou Bo. My lord, your humble servant is here, awaiting your instructions." Zhou Bo demanded, "So you still recognize me? Then why aren't you opening the gates?" The Capital Commandant continued bowing incessantly from the tower. "Your lordship's teachings I have always kept in my heart. Without your patronage, how could I have ever become the Capital Commandant? But I am an appointed official of the Imperial Court, and the Northern Army is the court's military. Without an edict from the Emperor, I absolutely dare not open the gates for your lordship." Furious and exasperated, Zhou Bo shouted, "You are right to obey the Emperor, and I obey the Emperor too. But if you don't open these gates today, you are making a grave mistake." The Capital Commandant remained firm but respectful. "Your lordship's words are all correct, but words alone are not proof. Please show me the Emperor's edict." Losing his temper, Zhou Bo charged forward and began hacking at the camp gates with his sword, shouting as he struck, "Open the gates! Open the gates! Or else you can just shoot your Grand Commandant to death!" Liu Zhang, the Marquis of Zhushu, rushed over to stop him. "Grand Commandant, wait a little longer. Didn't the Chancellor say so? He has a way to get you into the Northern Army camp. Let us just wait a bit longer." Why couldn't the dignified Grand Commandant of the Empire even order a military camp's gates to open? In the capital defense design of the First Chinese Empire, the vast capital environs outside the Imperial Palace fell entirely under the Capital Commandant. As a high-ranking official, the Capital Commandant commanded an elite field army. Stationed at Bashang, just north of Chang'an, this northern army could be traced directly back to the 50,000 elite crack troops who garrisoned Xianyang during the reign of the second emperor of Qin. By the early Han Dynasty, according to the precise records of the Book of Han, this standing army maintained a permanent force of over 30,000 men. Therefore, it could be said that the Northern Army was the lock on the gates of Chang'an. And now, the key to this lock, the military tally of the Northern Army, was gripped tightly in the hands of Empress Dowager Lü's clan. Before her death, she had elevated her nephew, Lü Lu, the King of Zhao, to the position of Supreme General to command the Northern Army. Thus, from the Capital Commandant's perspective, refusing Grand Commandant Zhou Bo's demand to enter was not just an adherence to military discipline, but a reflection of the Han Empire's cold, institutional design. Military power recognizes only the tally, not the man. Zhou Bo couldn't help but look back towards Chang'an. He could only place his hopes on the man he had always despised as a treacherous scoundrel, Chancellor Chen Ping. The city of Chang'an was just waking up, but the Empire's center of power could already smell blood. Inside the estate of the Prime Chancellor, Grand Censor Cao Zhu, nominally one of the three excellencies of the Empire, was respectfully kneeling on his mat, reporting state affairs to the Empire's administrative head, Prime Chancellor Liu Chan. Suddenly, a clamor shattered the morning's dead silence. The chief of the Imperial attendants, fully armored, was dragged into the Grand Hall by two guards. Covered in blood and riddled with wounds, he gasped heavily as he scrambled towards Liu Chan. "Prime Chancellor! Disaster! The sky is falling!" Then he hesitated, glancing at Cao Zhu. The Grand Censor attempted to rise and excuse himself. However, the Prime Chancellor waved his hand, signaling him to stay seated. Lord Cao is a childhood friend and confidant of the late Emperor. He is one of us. No need for evasion. Speak. The confidant jerked his head up, his eyes filled with despair. General Weiyang has defected. What? Liu Chan slammed the table and stood up, his face instantly turning deathly pale. Didn't he send back a victory dispatch just the day before yesterday, saying the King of Qi had retreated his troops back to his kingdom? It was a stalling tactic. The confidant roared hoarsely. Weiyang has struck a secret pact with the King of Qi. He told the King of Qi to hold his ground while he prepares to turn his army around and march back on Chang'an. Deathly silence fell over the grand hall. Cao Zhu kept his head down, not daring to utter a single word. The confidant grabbed Liu Chan's legs and cried out, "Prime Chancellor, we can wait no longer. We must strike first. You must immediately lead troops into the palace to control the Emperor and instantly execute the King of Qi's brother who remains in Chang'an, the Marquis of Zhuxu, Liu Zhang. Use his head to bless our banners." Liu Chan froze, a flicker of panic and hesitation flashing in his eyes. Liu Zhang. But he is the son-in-law of Supreme General Lu Lu. He is the current Emperor's brother-in-law. The confidant roared in despair. Even though he is a son-in-law of the Lu family, his surname is Liu. Amidst the chaos in the hall, no one noticed Cao Zhu quietly backing out. He boarded his carriage and shouted, "Quick, drive, go!" Just as Cao Zhu's carriage was about to exit the Prime Chancellor's estate, 2 guards blocked its path, shouting sternly, "Prime Chancellor has ordered a lockdown. No one is allowed in or out." The driver looked back in terror. "My lord, what do we do?" Cao Zhu clenching his jaw, a flash of absolute resolve appeared in his eyes. "It's do or die. Ram through them. Charge out!" The carriage burst through the blockade like an arrow loosed from a bow. Inside the violently jolting cabin, Cao Zhu gripped the armrests tightly and ordered the driver, "To the Chancellor's estate. Find Chen Ping." In the institutional design of the early Han Dynasty, the supreme power of the empire was shared by the 3 excellencies. The Chancellor managed administration, the Grand Commandant controlled the military, and the Grand Censor oversaw the officials. This was a perfect iron triangle of power. However, in the actual exercise of power, this iron triangle was often broken for various reasons. The most typical examples were the establishment of the Prime Chancellor and the Supreme General. Liu Chan's appointment as Prime Chancellor directly usurped the administrative power of Chancellor Chen Ping. Lu Lu's appointment as Supreme General completely stripped Grand Commandant Zhou Bo of his military authority. Among the 3 excellencies, the only one the Lu clan trusted and relied heavily upon was the Grand Censor, Cao Zhu. Why? Because since his youth, Cao Zhu had been the closest playmate and confidant of Emperor Hui of Han, Empress Dowager Lü's biological son. In the eyes of the Lu family, Cao Zhu wore the firm label of the Lu faction, which was why they were entirely off guard and allowed him to remain on site when the military secret was leaked. However, the Lu family made one fatal mistake. They forgot who Cao Zhu's father was. Cao Zhu's father was the second greatest founding meritocrat of the Great Han, the former Prime Chancellor who had fought alongside Liu Bang through mountains of corpses to conquer the realm, Cao Shen. Inside the Chancellor's estate, Chen Ping and Zhou Bo had stayed awake all night, still locked in secret negotiations. When Cao Zhu rushed in, they seemed to have expected him. Showing no panic, Chen Ping simply nodded and said, "If that is the case, we must strike immediately." He then slammed his finger onto the map. "Grand Commandant, you and Liu Zhang will ride to Bashang at once, seize command of the Northern Army, and then march your forces back to storm Weiyang Palace." The young and hot-blooded Liu Zhang stood up abruptly to object. "Chancellor, what about the Southern Army? Why not let the Grand Commandant take the Northern Army, while I lead men to incite a mutiny in the Southern Army?" Chen Ping stopped him coldly. "The Southern Army's forces are concentrated and strictly controlled by Liu Chan. Going there is a suicide mission. As long as we control the Northern Army, we control the entire situation." Zhou Bo furrowed his brow. "If Liu Chan directly leads the Southern Army to breach Weiyang Palace and takes the Emperor hostage, what good is taking the Northern Army? Furthermore, I cannot even guarantee that I can enter the Northern Army camp." "I will handle your entry into the Northern Army." Chen Ping's tone was flat. "As for inside the palace, I have my own arrangements." Though riddled with doubt, Zhou Bo and Liu Zhang had no choice but to depart immediately for Bashang, as time was of the essence. Inside the Chancellor's estate, only Chen Ping and the still traumatized Cao Zhu remained. Chen Ping slowly turned around, his eyes locking dead onto Cao Zhu. "Lord Cao," Chen Ping delivered a bone-chilling sentence in a completely flat tone. "Every civil and military official in the court knows that you have always been the Lu clan's man." Cao Zhu's knees gave way, nearly dropping him to the floor. "Chancellor, I am willing to fight to the death. Please, Chancellor, show me a way to survive." "Very well," Chen Ping said, still completely impassive. "I am giving you a suicide mission. You will charge into Weiyang Palace immediately. Find the commandant of the palace guards and have him seal the palace gates. If the gates cannot be held, you will charge directly into the main hall, rally the gentlemen of the household, and seal the doors to the main hall. In short, you must never let Lu Chan set foot in the main hall and reach the emperor." Cao Zhu's face turned deathly pale as he shook his head in despair. "The commandant of the palace guards will listen to me. And the gentlemen of the household, would they defy the chief of the imperial attendants to obey me?" "The commandant of the palace guards will listen to you. I have already arranged it." Chen Ping spoke with absolute certainty. "And the gentlemen of the household will listen to you as well." Cao Zhu still looked hesitant. "Lu Chan commands the Southern Army. Even if the commandant and the gentlemen listen to me, we absolutely cannot hold them off." "I never expected you to hold them off." Chen Ping patted Cao Zhu on the shoulder. "If Lu Chan insists on storming the palace gates, you will indeed face certain death. However, the moment he dares to order an attack on the main hall of Weiyang Palace, he cements the heinous crime of armed treason. At that instant, the Lu clan will be reduced to ashes. Lord Cao, even if you die, you will be remembered for eternity as a loyal subject who gave his life for the emperor of the Great Han." Cao Zhu stared fixedly at Chen Ping, clenched his jaw, bowed deeply, and turned to leave. Watching Cao Zhu's retreating figure, Chen Ping let out a long breath. He immediately ordered the Chancellor's personal guards to mobilize. Their target? The estate of the Marquis of Kuzhou. If the capital commandant and the Northern Army formed the outer defense line protecting the entire metropolitan sphere, then the task of protecting the core area of the Imperial Palace fell to the commandant of the palace guards and the Southern Army. Stationed in the southern part of Chang'an, near Weiyang and Changle palaces, this garrison force dedicated to protecting the Empress Dowager and the Emperor was known as the Southern Army. In the early Han Dynasty, the Southern Army boasted a total strength of nearly 20,000 men. Unlike the field army nature of the Northern Army, the Southern Army was a purely defensive force with an exquisitely detailed command structure. However, the Southern Army was only responsible for the outer perimeter and gate security of the imperial compound. The true core area where the emperor lived, the inner sanctum of Weiyang Palace, was protected by another independent, high-ranking Nine Minister, the Chief of the Imperial Attendants. The Chief of the Imperial Attendants commanded a group of personal bodyguards and noble scions who reported directly to the emperor. In terms of numbers, the gentlemen's forces were far inferior to the Southern Army, but they possessed absolute loyalty and zeal for the emperor. A subject leading troops to attack the emperor's sleeping quarters was termed regicide and high treason. The moment Lu Chan took this step, he would cease to be the all-powerful Prime Chancellor and become an openly rebelling traitor. At that point, not only would the fiercely loyal gentleman fight him to the death, but even the low-ranking soldiers within his own Southern Army would waver. In fact, the chief of the Imperial Attendants at the time was none other than the Lu family confidant Cao Zhu had just seen fleeing back from Guan Ying's army. But what did that matter? No pleasantries, no announcements. Chen Ping led the Chancellor's personal guards and stormed into the estate of the Marquis of Kuzhou, instantly neutralizing the founding patriarch of the Great Han, Li Shang. Hearing the commotion, Li Shang's son, Li Ji, rushed into the main hall and roared at Chen Ping. "Chancellor, what is the meaning of this? Didn't we have an agreement?" Chen Ping remained remarkably calm, playing a game of Go with Li Shang. "Your father and I are close friends, and you are close friends with Supreme General Lu Lu." Chen Ping looked up. "At a matter of life and death, something like friendship is utterly unreliable. Controlling your father is merely to help you make up your mind." Indeed, Chen Ping had long grown accustomed to the dark side of human nature. He would never gamble his fate on ethereal verbal pacts. What he demanded was absolute collateral. Cold sweat dripped down Li Ji's face. He looked at the armored soldiers with drawn swords in the courtyard, then at his white-haired, expressionless father, who was still playing Go with Chen Ping. Finally, he slumped his shoulders in defeat. "What do you want me to do?" "You did very well previously." Chen Ping lowered his voice. "Now for the final step. You will go see Lu Lu immediately. Use whatever excuse necessary to convince him to hand over the Northern Army's tally. If he absolutely refuses, the bottom line is, you must lure him in person out of the Northern Army camp." Li Ji nodded and turned to leave. The grand hall fell silent once more. The veteran General Li Shang looked at Chen Ping and sighed. These two old foxes, who had spent most of their lives tasting blood on the edge of a blade, sat in the very eye of the storm that would decide the fate of the Empire, acting as if nothing were amiss as they continued to play their stones in total silence. Shortly after, an armored guard reported in a low voice from outside the door. "Chancellor, Jitong, the Marquis of Xiangping, has arrived." Li Shang's finger paused. He raised his eyes to look at Chen Ping. "Why call that boy Jitong over at a time like this?" Chen Ping placed a black stone on the board. "Jitong is a good boy. His father died early, but at the end of the day, he is also a fellow townsman from Fengpei. And most importantly..." Chen Ping turned his head to look at the young Marquis, peering inside from beyond the doorway. "Never forget, he is the prefect of the Imperial Tally." The early Han court was crowded with founding meritocrats of all ranks. Yet this so-called meritocrat faction was far from a monolith. It was fractured into two major camps, the Fengpei faction and the Dang Commandery faction. The Fengpei faction, led by figures like Xiao He, Cao Shen, Zhou Bo, and Lu Wan, were purebred fellow townsmen of Emperor Liu Bang. During Liu Bang's era, their power overshadowed the realm. However, after Empress Dowager Lü took power, in order to consolidate the Lü clan's rule, the Fengpei faction faced systematic marginalization and deliberate suppression. Standing head-to-head against the Fengpei faction was the Dang Commandery faction. Empress Dowager Lü herself hailed from Dang Commandery. Under her patronage, generals from Dang Commandery experienced a meteoric rise. Aside from the scions of the Lü family, the two most prestigious founding veterans in this faction were Guan Ying, a great general of cavalry origins, and Li Shang, who could speak directly with the Empress Dowager. Chen Ping, however, was from Chen Liu Commandery. He was neither a fellow townsman of Fengpei nor a core member of Dang Commandery. He wasn't even an original follower from Liu Bang's earliest days. Rather, he was a defected Chu general who joined halfway through. Yet it was precisely his status as an absolute outsider, floating beyond all factions, that allowed him to feign allegiance to the Lü family to gain their trust, while simultaneously spending over a decade secretly threading the needle to mend the rift between the Fengpei and Dang Commandery factions. However, Chen Ping understood human nature far too well. He coldly pressed the dagger of pragmatism against the throat of the Li family, whom he could not fully trust, forcing Li Ji to betray his own friend. The afternoon sun scorched the yellow earth of Bashang. The urgent clatter of a carriage and horses approached from the direction of Chang'an. A black carriage dashed forth, braking violently before the barricades. The young prefect of the Imperial Tally, Jitong, held high a long staff adorned with a yak tail. The Imperial Tally, the symbol of the supreme authority. "Grand Commandant Zhou Bo, receive the Emperor's edict." Jitong stood on the carriage shafts, his voice echoing outside the vast, empty camp gates. "By the decree of the Son of Heaven, effective immediately, Grand Commandant Zhou Bo shall take full command of the Northern Army." This was a highly unorthodox promulgation. No yellow silk, no written edict, not even a palace attendant, just a weightless verbal transmission. The capital commandant stood on the camp wall, asking calmly, "Lord Ji, where is the written edict? Where is the Northern Army's military tally?" The air froze. Jitong swallowed hard, but he glared at the capital commandant with an immensely oppressive gaze and shouted sternly, "Lord Commandant, the Imperial Tally is in my hands. What do you suspect I would dare use this tally to issue a fake decree and forge the Emperor's command?" This was what Chen Ping had taught him, to use unquestionable absolute authority to crush low-level procedural justice. The capital commandant fell silent. He dared not claim the tally was fake, but rules were rules. Without the military tally, he absolutely dared not open the gates lightly. He tried to use silence to stall for time, waiting for instructions from Lulu. In this hair-trigger moment of life and death, the deputy commandant ran up the watchtower, panting heavily. With an ashen face, he whispered into the capital commandant's ear, "My lord, Supreme General Lulu suddenly left the camp at noon. His whereabouts are unknown." This sentence made the capital commandant instantly realize what was happening. Clenching his jaw, he gave a sharp order. "Open the gates! Welcome the Grand Commandant!" The gates of the Northern Army finally opened. Zhou Bo let out a long sigh of relief and spurred his horse into the camp. Just then, another flurry of hoofbeats kicked up a cloud of dust. A senior official rushed to the front of Zhou Bo's horse and held high a red and black wooden box. Inside was the Northern Army's military tally, surrendered by Lulu. All suspense was gone. Accompanied by Jitong, Zhou Bo strode up to the commander's platform. Holding the bronze military tally aloft before the assembled officers and soldiers of the Northern Army, he roared, "Those who stand with the Lü clan, bear your right arms. Those who stand with the Liu clan, bear your left arms." Led by the capital commandant, the 20,000-strong army, like a wheat field swept by a gale, uniformly tore off the armor on their left arms. The roaring chants of "Long live! Long live! Long live!" shattered the clouds over Chang'an. The Northern Army had completely changed hands. Wasting not a single second, Zhou Bo immediately mustered 1,000 of the most elite armored cavalry and handed them to Liu Zhang. "Storm the palace at maximum speed." Since its rise during the Warring States period, the military tally was not just a token of trust. It was the hallmark of the ancient Chinese military, moving towards high professionalization and nationalization. The tally was usually divided into two halves. The right half remained with the emperor, while the left half was given to the frontline commanding general. Only when the two halves of the tally fit together seamlessly could the army be legally mobilized. In the institutional design of the early Han Dynasty, the function of the Grand Commandant was actually closer to today's Secretary of Defense, or Chief of the General Staff. He possessed supreme military administrative power and strategic planning authority, but he had no direct command over the troops. Through long-term professional training, Han soldiers were indoctrinated with the absolute, machine-like logic of recognizing only the tally, not the man. Let alone the Grand Commandant, even if the Lord of Heaven himself descended, as long as he didn't have that seamlessly matching bronze tally, the grassroots soldiers would absolutely not budge a single step. So the question arises, even if the prefect of the imperial tally, Ji Tong, could forge an imperial decree, how exactly did Supreme General Lu Lu hand over the Northern Army's military tally? 1 hour earlier, Lu Lu, the king of Zhao, was restless inside the Northern Army camp. His cousin, Prime Chancellor Lu Chan, had brought news. General Guan Ying might be defecting and plotting rebellion. His Northern Army needed to make preparations early. Make preparations? How? Guan Ying commanded a massive army of 200,000 men. If he truly attacked, what use would his mere 50,000 Northern Army soldiers be? Just then, in his moment of utmost helplessness, his most trusted confidant, a man like an elder brother to him, Li Ji, walked into the central command tent, looking completely relaxed. Why is the Grand General so fraught with worry? Li Ji patted Lu Lu's shoulder, his voice as gentle as a spring breeze. The matter regarding Guan Ying might not even be true, and it's already confirmed that the Qi army has retreated to their kingdom. Chancellor Lu Chan is guarding the imperial palace. Before the situation is clear, what use is your anxiety? Lulu replied, "If I don't worry, what else can I do? Those who achieve great things must carry heavy burdens with ease. Rather than bearing this weight, Grand General, why not leave the camp with us and go hunting?" Desperately yearning to escape reality, Lulu clutched at this like a drowning man catching a straw. Absurdly, he agreed. To appear relaxed, he brought only a handful of personal guards, mounted his warhorse, and followed Li Ji out of that Northern Army camp, the only place that could guarantee his life. However, as this small hunting party passed by the estate of Lulu's aunt, Lu Shu, the white-haired woman charged out of her gates. Pointing at Lulu on horseback, she hurled bitter curses, tears of despair streaking her face. "You utter fool! At a life-and-death juncture like this, when generals and chancellors are plotting treason, you dare to leave the army to go hunting? You've thrown away your military power, and now our entire Lu family, young and old, will soon die without a burial place." Lu Shu's curses struck like a heavy hammer, completely shattering the psychological buffer Lu had just built. Terrified, he pulled hard on the reins, wanting to turn back to camp. At that moment, Li Ji spoke to him with feigned utmost sincerity. "Grand General, hand over your military power and return to your kingdom of Zhao. You are no match for the king of Qi or Guan Ying. If you surrender your command now and go back to Zhao, you can still enjoy a life of wealth and glory. If you drag this out any longer, the consequences will be unimaginable. The whole world knows we are the closest of friends. Would I, as your elder brother, push you into a pit of fire?" The weak-willed Lu looked at Li Ji's sincere face. In extreme fear and exhaustion, he muttered to himself, "Yes, my brother wouldn't lie to me." He handed the military tally of the Northern Army to Li Ji. The sudden collapse of Lu was, in truth, the inevitable result of the Lu clan's inherent weakness. Empress Dowager Lü could give her nephew military power, but she could not give him competence. Even though the Liu clan had suffered continuous political suppression during Empress Dowager Lü's 15-year reign, the military foundation carved into their very bones remained profound. In stark contrast, Lü Lu had been forcibly hoisted to the empire's highest position, relying entirely on nepotism. Chen Ping saw right through this weakness and incompetence, which was why he dispatched Li Ji. In this psychological warfare, Li Ji merely rubbed salt into Lü Lu's festering wounds, offering him the illusion of a dignified surrender. And while Li Ji, who delivered this fatal strike, achieved the monumental merit of preserving the Liu clan, he also went down in history bearing the eternal infamy of Li Ji betrays his friend. Still entirely oblivious to everything that had transpired at Bashang, Prime Chancellor Lu Chan finally made his move. Leading his trusted troops, he charged toward Weiyang Palace. He intended to seize control of the emperor. Initially, everything went smoothly. At the outermost Sima gate of Weiyang Palace, there wasn't even a semblance of resistance. The Southern Army guards simply opened the gates and let them through. However, as Lu Chan's army approached the Duan Gate in front of the main hall of Weiyang Palace, they found it tightly shut. "Open the gates!" Lu Chan's deputy shouted fiercely. The captain of the Duan Gate stood atop the high palace wall, replying expressionlessly. "By the strict orders of the commandant of the palace guards, the palace gates are locked. No one is allowed to enter." Burning with rage, Lu Chan abruptly drew his sword, spurred his horse forward, and roared, "Insolence! As Prime Chancellor, I command the Southern Army and am responsible for the security of the entire Imperial Palace. Enough nonsense. Open the gates immediately." Facing the all-powerful Prime Chancellor and a dark mass of troops, the captain of the gate had little choice. The heavy Duan Gate was forced slowly open. But the moment Lu Chan crossed that threshold, a profoundly ominous premonition suddenly rose in his heart. Sure enough, passing through the Duan Gate and entering the vast square before the main hall of Weiyang Palace, Lu Chan discovered that before the doors of the main hall, the commandant of the palace guards and Grand Censor Cao Zhu, leading the fully armed guards of the gentlemen of the household, stood dead in their tracks like a wall of iron. "Cao Zhu, you dare block me!" Lu Chan raised his sword, threatening, "If you don't step aside, do not blame the Prime Chancellor for initiating a massacre." Though his legs were turning to jelly, Cao Zhu clung desperately to the trump card Chen Ping had taught him. Pointing directly at Lu Chan's nose, he roared with all his might. "Lu Chan, the Emperor has issued no edict summoning you to the palace. If you dare lead troops even half a step up the stairs of the main hall today, you are harboring treasonous intent. It is outright rebellion." Ultimately, Lu Chan was merely an incompetent man, forcibly elevated by his aunt. He dared not order a forceful assault, yet he was unwilling to retreat. Incredibly, he just stood there with his army, like a bewildered trapped beast, wasting the final countdown of his life in the square before the hall. Hours later, the setting sun was the color of blood, and a fierce gale suddenly whipped up. A sound of thundering hooves swept in from outside the palace like muffled thunder. Liu Zhang, the Marquis of Zhuxu, leading 1,000 elite iron cavalry, descended like troops from the heavens, charging into the Weiyang Palace Square. "Lu Chan is committing treason! By the order of the Grand Commandant, kill without mercy!" Liu Zhang's roar echoed in the howling wind. At this moment, the mandate of heaven abandoned the Lu clan. The sudden gale, sending sand and stones flying, shattered the morale of the Southern Army under Lu Chan's command. Facing the elite Northern Army charging like tigers descending a mountain, they instantly scattered and fled like birds and beasts. The once imperious Prime Chancellor Lu Chan, consumed by extreme terror, abandoned his army and fled in utter disgrace. Finally, in a secluded latrine in a corner of Weiyang Palace, he was caught by the pursuing Liu Zhang, who pierced his chest with a single sword thrust. Lu Chan's death was both comical and pathetic. He made one fatal mistake: hesitation. In this standoff at Weiyang Palace, there was a crucial figure overlooked by many: that commandant of the Weiyang Palace Guards who defended the main hall to the death. Historical records only note that his name was Zhu. They didn't even leave his surname. Yet months after the new emperor ascended the throne, he was heavily rewarded with a fiefdom of 400 households. This was by no means an ordinary tale of a loyal subject protecting his master. At the time, Chang'an primarily had two major palaces, Weiyang Palace and Changle Palace. Therefore, there were two commandants of the palace guards. The commandant of Changle Palace was Empress Dowager Lü's grandnephew, Lu Gengshi. For Weiyang Palace, the most important palace in the empire, its commandant Zhu was undoubtedly one of their own, meticulously hand-picked and deeply trusted by the Lü family. Yet it was exactly this commandant who should have been dead-set loyal to the Lü family. who defected at the most critical moment of life and death, standing with Cao Zhu to block the Prime Chancellor outside the main hall. Who secretly turned him? Who transformed this die-hard loyalist of the Lü clan into a bulwark for the Liu clan? Following Lu Chan's death, the tightly closed doors of the main hall of Weiyang Palace finally, slowly pushed open one panel. A close attendant, holding another imperial tally representing supreme imperial power, walked down the steps trembling. He had come on the Emperor's orders to console the Northern Army, which had just experienced a bloody battle before the hall. In the actions of an emperor, there is never the word simple. The 16-year-old teenage emperor, who had hidden behind the palace doors all day, finally made a political declaration. From the moment he chose to console the Northern Army, the nature of this coup fundamentally changed. It was no longer a struggle between two political factions fighting for power, but a lawful execution of the consort kin of the Lü clan on behalf of the state's orthodox loyalty. But why did the emperor's political validation come so late? The reason is simple. Although his surname was Liu, the blood of the Lü family also flowed in his veins. Being a Liu gave him the possibility of ascending the throne, but the Lü family was the ultimate deciding force that actually crowned him. Bloodlust clouding his eyes, Liu Zhang forcefully dragged the attendant holding the tally onto his own war chariot. What he wanted was not just consolation, he wanted the absolute permission brought by this imperial tally. Borrowing the emperor's tally, Liu Zhang led the great army and slaughtered their way into the Lü family's stronghold, Chang'an Palace, as if entering an unpopulated land. Lu Gengshi, the commandant of Chang'an Palace, was hacked to death by a flurry of blades in despair. With this as the beginning, a massacre targeting the entire Lü clan spiraled completely out of control under the night sky of Chang'an. The sunlight once again shone on the flying eaves of Weiyang Palace. Chang'an welcomed a new day amidst the glow of blood. Over 24 hours, Chancellor Chen Ping and Grand Commandant Zhou Bo completed an unbelievable, desperate counterkill. Using lies, betrayal, and extreme cold-bloodedness, they purged the Empire's tumor, fulfilling the White Horse Oath sworn years ago. If anyone not of the Liu clan is crowned king, let the whole Empire unite to strike him down. It seems the story should end here, a perfect, heroic conclusion of loyal subjects saving the nation. But in the true political world, once the machinery of slaughter is set in motion, it is very hard to stop. At this very moment, Chang'an was enveloped in an even more massive, even more suffocating mystery. Since the Lü family had been slaughtered clean, what about those imperial princes who had half of the Lü family's blood flowing in them? Or to ask even more directly, what about the current reigning emperor, who just last night sent someone out with the imperial tally, actively acknowledging the coup's legitimacy? The 24 hours in the imperial capital would eventually draw to a close, but the stench of blood was far from dissipating.